Hello and welcome to budget edition of Simply inTAXicating. The budget makers have entered into the final leg of giving finishing touches to the budget proposals. Now the fact that the GST bill is stuck in a quagmire, a lot of changes which were expected earlier, now Mr Jaitley will have to perhaps think in terms of rationalizing, simplifying and integrating provisions like sin-VAT credit rules with respect to central excise and service tax. Of course, our exports are in a bad shape today. A lot of changes are expected, particularly from the industry and trade with respect to the customs. So, not many changes which industry and trade are looking forward to. On the indirect tax front, we have 4 domain experts with us. We have Mr. Sumit Dutt Majumder, former Chairman, Central Board of Excise and Customs. We have Mr. Siddharth Mehta from KMPG. We have Mr. D D Goyal from Maruti. And we have Anita Rastogi from PwC. So let me start with Mr. Majumder. Sir, I would request you to give us a kind of bird's eye view about the kind of changes which you are expecting in this budget. Particularly emphasis should be on the indirect tax side.
One school of thought says that the fiscal budget management, that the fiscal deficit management has to be very strict. So as you know that I think Finance Minister has fixed the target of 3.9% of GDP.
Right.
You have to do this, that you have to take some other steps like your expenditure management and reduction of the expenditure. I will come into that.
We will talk
later.
about that expenditure part.
The main part is that your direct tax, there's not much scope for increase. 33% higher is quite high already.
Corporate tax, yes.
So you cannot increase. Corporate tax, it is 30%, and there's a commitment from Finance Minister, the next 4 years he will bring it down.
Correct.
Because he wants foreign capital, FDI is needed. So that is also cannot be done. So the only thing that he can rely upon is your indirect taxes.
Yeah, Siddharth, what's your take?
Rationalizing our existing tax regimes, especially service tax and sin-VAT credit. There's a big demand of the industry that should happen. Simplifying the compliances.
Right.
There could be specific sectors or products for which duty incentives can be given.
Right.
We need to address the inverted duty structure that we have. Abolition of SED. So these are some of the measures that the industry would expect the government to take this time.
Okay.
The other thing that I'm expecting is that there would be some measures, some initiatives which would be aimed at promoting some of the pet projects of the government.
Okay.
So be it the Make in India initiative or let's say the Startup India.
Right.
So for example, for Make in India, again liberalization of credit regime.
We will talk about that. We will come back to Make in India is very important part of the repertoire which Mr. Modi has prepared for himself. There are too many missions are there, sir. We will talk about Make in India separately.
So similarly for startups also, I'm expecting that there would be some measures aimed at giving some relief to the startups. So it could be in the form of, let's say, a blanket exemption to startups for a certain period or up to a certain threshold. Or it could be a very focused, selective kind of, measures. So for example, giving them the option to pay service tax on cash basis for a certain period rather than on accrual basis. So that could be one measure.
That could be one measure.
Now, what I'm also expecting is, and that this is something that the industry probably may not want, but it could happen in the run-up to GST. The service tax rate probably could go up because if you're talking about a higher GST rate on services, then there is a case to increase the service tax rate from existing 14% to let's say 16%.
Okay.
Likewise, I won't be surprised if some of the existing excise exemptions are pruned.
Okay.
The 2% and the concessional 6% rate that we have, maybe we'll see it moving to let's say 4% and 8% respectively.
Okay.
But at the same time, I would also expect the government to cut down the CST rate from 2% to 1%.
Okay. So, two very high expectations, sir. Yes. All about cutting. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So overall, this is what I'm expecting. So I'm expecting a lot of bold initiatives this time.
Okay. Perfect. Mr. Goyal, what about you?
Under GST, the input credit would be on basis of the supplier's invoice matching online. Like I am from auto industry.
Right.
Before we launch a product, what we call a pre-production trial.
Right.
In India, still automation level is at a very different level. We may be fully 100% automated. There may be a roadside shop who have everything in a diary in his pocket.
Right, absolutely.
So, before GST is actually rolled out, central government can change the rule, maybe even optional basis of input credit, exactly in the same process what will happen in GST. If I elaborate further, it will save, one is this one, plus today it's all paper based.
Right.
Let me explain very brief. Let each supplier, whosoever is optional, let us say, suppose somebody who is supplying tires to Maruti, those two, he loads his invoices on the government's website every day.
Okay.
The truck carries a smart card with the invoice detail instead of paper print. So in between, if there's any flying squad, any checkpoint, he can check that. When the recipient receives the goods, he uploads the data. And then what GST is saying, that let the matching takes place and input credit is allowed on basis of online matching of the data instead of the paper.
Right.
It will give an industry to check them to prepare, and it should be optional so that everybody who's willing to test their system, they are able to test.
So we will talk about that. So this GST network, the GST in, how well prepared they are for this kind of pilot project. Mr. Goyal is suggesting the invoice matching, which happens to be the core of the overall strategy to curb misuse of send-back credit, to stop fraud. So we will look at that aspect, of course.
Okay. And then one more suggestion, it's very specific, is of an anomaly. Most of the states have given a sort of an incentive to the new mega industries. There is a little bit of anomaly today because of 2-3 Supreme Court decisions. There was a CBEC very clear circular that incentive, if it's given by way of exemption, this would be the tax treatment. If it's given by way of a deferment, then this would be the tax treatment. If it's given by way of a subsidy, this would be tax treatment in 99 and then 2000. However, Supreme Court has overruled all those, saying that no, the circular does not convey what law says. It's a mismatch between the law and the circular.
Okay.
So what we have suggested to the government, what state government is giving, central government should not take away. Suppose state government is giving that in excise valuation, that money is not coming from the buyer. We are thankful to the government, like in the Fiat, Supreme Court passed a judgment, but then it was understood that yes, there is a difference. The same way this one, what is the government intention, it would request the government should come out very clearly.
So basically, from my perspective, I think there are 3-4 key mantras which should be the base for this particular budget. I think one really is that we are all aware that in April 16 the GST is not going to come. So run up to the GST, there has to be very strong points which have to be adhered to in this budget, which clearly show the movement towards GST.
Right.
Which could be a lot of them, which is of course like Siddharth mentioned, increasing of the service tax rate, or it could also be things like increasing the threshold limit. Like in service tax today we have 10 lakh rupees, so maybe 25 lakh rupees could be the increase increase in the threshold limit.
Right.
Also for the fact that all the credits, all the business expenditure should be allowed as credit for all the businesses, because that's the theme which will happen in GST regime of things. And also, yes, a lot of exemption should be removed. As Mr. Majumder mentioned, that is going to be a bold. It is an year where they can take bold decisions. Then please remove most of the exemptions which can be removed today, because that's really the path which we have to follow in the GST regime.
Right.
So this is one. The second mantra is really like Make in India theme. Now, Make in India, which means it also goes with ease of doing business.
Right.
So if there are people who are manufacturing in India, and there are certain interpretational issues because of which there is a case which is actually they are fighting in the courts, and tomorrow if they lose it, they have to pay interest. The interest rate is very, very high. 18, 24, 30 is what they say. But let's understand, I think the objective of the government to bring that high rate of interest really was when the corporates have collected the tax and not paid it to the authorities.
Right.
It's not a question when they're fighting a case and still they have to pay so much of interest. I think that is something, a dampener, which they should take care of it now.
Okay.
The next thing is that they have sort of curtailed the availment of credit time period. You can only go back 1 year to take the credit of the input taxes, whether it's services or goods. I think that was never there in the past. And we have a lot of High Court decisions and Supreme Court decisions which says that credit never really lapses. So why do you want to bring this particular curtailment? Make it more easy for the businesses to focus on business rather than on tax matters, because then they have to think, okay, 1 year only I can take the credit. Let me ensure that I take it within the right time.
But 1 year is not sufficient.
Not
for
at all,
credit?
not at all, because you see
Where
there
is
are
the
a lot
problem, sir? There must be some studies in the Ministry of Finance. The government must be knowing that 1 year period is not adequate. Is it the case, sir? 1 year period is not enough for availing credit?
Because there are
what has
various
been your
situations, you
experience?
see, basically there are a lot of situations where a person cannot take credit because it could be, there is some sort of a dispute between a service which has been rendered, or there has been a vendor who has not been performing proper services. So there can be a lot of situations. And why do we put a burden on the business for this? That this is the strict timeline. Anyways, today the business has to follow various strict timelines, multiple returns, tax payments, deadlines. And couple of more points on the Make in India is, as he was saying, mentioning that exports has got impacted. Now, there is a particular concept of intermediary which has come under service tax, which has caused a lot of problem on the interpretation of the definition of intermediary. What does it mean? Are we talking about all the Indian agents for the foreign party? They are falling under the definition of intermediary and hence they have to pay tax. If they do that, what happens is that their business gets reduced, one. Secondly, the goods which are manufactured in India and which are exported are also getting impacted. So we have to see the holistic picture rather than just
hurting our export.
It is actually hurting our exports.
Right. Yeah, Siddharth, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was saying on that 1 year thing, given the fact that our service tax law is currently marred with controversies and ambiguities, after there are doubts in terms of whether my output is liable to service tax or not. So if I decide not to pay service tax today on my revenue and 2 years down the line the matter is decided against me, at that point in time I would want to reinstate my Senvet credit. But with this 1 year window coming to picture, I lose that ability to reinstate the Senvet credit, whereas on the output I have to pay full service tax along with interest.
Absolutely.
Okay. So do you think that here a simple proviso, if it is inserted, can do the job by saying that in case of any demand being litigated in a court of law, after the decision comes out, maybe the SSC could be allowed credit like this in those cases, or it should be kind of uniform for everybody?
Well, a lot of issues have been raised. This is one. There are many other ills of the present system, and we expect the GST to take care of that. The first point is that, I'm not going to the individual to this.
Right.
Yes, I'm definitely when the GST comes and when everything will be technology based, I don't think there is any need for having such timeline for this thing, because you are, as Siddharth pointed out, that the business is put into the disadvantageous position.
Right.
And ultimately, whatever he's paying is going into the value of the goods.
Right.
Because he's not paying from his own pocket.
Right.
So why to have this? So I'm sure in the GST, so this is the responsibility of the trade and industry now to point out all the anomalies of the present system so that it is not that. That is the whole idea of GST. That's why it's a big ticket reform. Customs and excise valuation matters have been put into the draft law. There are certain VAT laws have been put in the draft law.
Correct.
So all those things should be pointed out. The budget should see, as particularly mentioned, the clear signal should be given by the FM that we are serious about it. So first thing I would say, threshold. So threshold, now the dispute is that center has 1.5 crore on the goods excise, 10 lakhs on service tax. State has 3 to 5 lakhs, different states. So center had proposed 25 lakhs. States are saying no, 10 lakhs. You had interviewed Mr. Nosson, the expert on GST, and he said that it should be very high. Small business is not the ones to be taxed. It's cumbersome.
I favor 50 lakhs.
Yes. You had said 50 lakhs.
So the tax committee had mentioned 40
but
lakhs.
tax Arvind Subramaniam committee, CA report has a 40 lakhs.
Right.
So let's see what happens, but then there should not. So keeping that in mind, I think that government should bring down the SSI exemption, that limit threshold, from 1.5 crore to at least half it, 75 lakhs. Right. And you lift that service tax exemption, the threshold, from 10 lakhs to 20 lakhs. Right. So if you do that, that way, a lot of things in the 10 to 20 lakhs, all those things will go out of this thing. So you should prepare. This is one point. Secondly, the exemptions. 300 excise exemptions. Right. And there are 100 exemptions on the VAT side. So a lot of exemptions will have to go. The exercise is going on. That certain exemptions will have to remain for the sake of growth. Like you can't remove the exemptions on power sector. You can't remove exemptions in the infrastructure sector. But if I may use the word, there are a lot of exemptions which are out of rent seeking. So those should go.
Yeah. Mr. Goyal suggested that it's related to GST again, sir, the invoice matching. Which happens to be the Brahmastra, where the revenue wants to have in order to curb the misuse of Senvet credit. And he is suggesting that there should be a pilot project.
I think it's a very valid suggestion, and it must be done, because this is the most complicated. I always maintain the most complicated part of GST is, one is the credit, finalizing the credit system, and second is the interstate movement of goods, for which you have the place of supply rules. So both these things will have to be tested by the GST net. And for testing it, GST, they must know the clear laws now. So this is very much needed. And as I'll just mention here, because I keep on moving to places and talking about GST, there is a apprehension amongst the trade and industry that that without the matching done, the credit will not be given. So he said that many cases we get much later. till that time we will not get the credit.
Right.
So something has to be done there also, because you are talking, Siddharth has mentioned about the ease of doing business and all those things are there.
Right.
So GST net will have to come quickly, and I tell you that is as you rightly said, is Brahmastra, and it is the most delicate matter in the whole scheme of GST. Because it was identified in 2009 December itself, when 2009 November, the first discussion paper came out by the Empowered Committee, and the then Finance Minister, I was in the board at that time, called us and then immediately said that we can't have this sort of GST without a strong IT infrastructure.
Right.
And you will recall that Dr. Nandan Nilekani was given this job and all. So this is very valid suggestion.
Yes, Siddharth.
If I may just add to that, today also I believe at the state level, there are some states which already have this matching mechanism in place. States like Delhi, Rajasthan and all, which have gone online, Maharashtra also, which do this kind of reconciliation. It's just that the scale will change completely under GST, because for the first time we will have pan-India transaction level details residing into one common portal. So the number of transactions that would need to be reconciled
will be in billions.
Yeah.
So
Also
you have
from
some
a timing
experience?
perspective, I think, Siddharth, I think in most of the states it's on an annual basis,
On an
rather monthly. In some of them, it's like annual.
Yeah, so
I
there are
think the
some states which
periodicity
I
of the
believe are
states-
currently also doing it on a regular basis.
regular basis. Yeah.
So what I was suggesting was give it as an option.
Right.
Because unless GST comes,
Right.
whosoever wants to opt, and I would suggest, even if suppose the industry is asked to pay some transaction fee for using the services,
Okay.
but matching frequency should be optional,
Right.
not necessarily monthly. If I give like an example, if I want to make a payment to my supplier, I would like to make sure that he has loaded his invoices on the government website.
Correct.
So,
You can verify that and accordingly release
let
the
him
payment.
load every day.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
That's a
Naturally,
very
the
valid-
moment it is linked to the payment,
And we as a country, just want
yes.
to, I think we as a country are capable.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I fully agree. Yeah. Anita.
A couple of things also on the ease of doing business in India is that I think working capital is one of the very core thing which always corporates look at. So we have this provision under indirect tax that if you have to go in appeal, then you have to pay the 7.5% or 10% mandatory.
Yeah.
So why can't it be converted into some sort of non-revocable bank guarantee which can be given rather than actually paying that amount of money? Because we all know for a fact that if there is a litigation, which is really only because of an interpretational issue, and largely at the lower level, we all know that till the tribunal, one doesn't really actually get a beneficial order form, on that particular issue. So you have to continuously make that payment. So I think that is one thing which is very important. That is one.
Do you think if the government makes it, the discretion is vested in the tribunal to waive off, grant waiver of this pre-deposit, 7.5%, will it work?
I don't think she should write. They should
It will
not
not work?
provision. No.
Because if the tribunal, sir, is
Why should
exercising
you-
the discretion
as she
Yeah, so
suggested.
that there is
actually
a
what
merit in allegation,
Right.
then
No,
So that
see,
was the old regime, obviously.
Right.
But then we had to file a stay application also. But now that stay application
it
has
will
gone.
only increase this thing. But what I would suggest is, to her suggestion that, like in the customs side, there's this continuous bond is there.
Absolutely.
You have a continuous bond, you go on debiting that bond.
Exactly.
And as it's going over, then again you just with the customs, all the provisional deposits, PD bond we
Yes,
call
the
it.
PD bond is there,
So
yes.
it should be done. Something like that.
The thing on the working capital, which I think is that today for import of services or wherever we have to pay tax on a reverse charge basis, we have to first pay the tax by cash. Why don't we allow it by credit? I mean, how does it matter? Anyway, it's a revenue neutral. And in most of the developed economies, that's the way they do it. They actually just do a net off. So I think that is something which we should, because only for 1 month, you really insist the person to pay by cash. It doesn't really serve the purpose for the government, but it does help the corporates a lot.
it's a little archaic. Maybe we can do away with this kind
We
of
can do away with this.
Yes.
And for that, you don't need a parliament's approval or
Nothing
Yes.
at all.
Correct.
This is the
Nothing.
procedural one, can be done by CBEC at any point of time.
Right, sir, absolutely. In case of service tax, I have also heard that good number of industry and trade and associations are apparently demanding from the government that the payment date, which happens to be 6th, it should be perhaps 15th. So let's have a first-hand experience from Mr. Goyal. What do you think? I mean, this date should be postponed to 15th or something?
Two suggestions. First is date 6th is totally bad. It's very impractical because most of the companies are able to close their accounts. Even if you complete the transaction by 31st, it will be 8th or 9th.
Okay.
So today when you have to deposit service tax on 6th, it's a big struggle. Many times you have to deposit something ad hoc. because you have
Yeah,
to
that's
get all that amount.
Okay, it's a short payment. So next time you have to-
minimum date, I would say from large industry perspective, should be 10th, not
Okay.
6th. And second, the biggest problem is coming off 31st March. In indirect tax, why do the government wants the tax to be paid by 31st for the transaction to be done on 31st?
Right.
Like if I give example, we pay a very significant amount of royalty on that reverse charge service tax is paid.
Yes.
Now, we do the transaction till midnight.
Right.
So, yes, you can have like advance tax, whatever your tax payable, government can fix 90% of tax or 85% of tax, you ask them to pay by 31st.
Right.
But should be allowed again by 10th of April that we check our actual numbers.
Right. And
And
make the actual
pay.
payment, yes, absolutely. Yeah, Anita,
Yeah,
you
so
wanted
this
to add.
basically I also wanted to say that regarding revision of return, because we understand corporates face a lot of problems. So today we have 90 days for revision of return for service taxes, right? But then, normally what happens, balance sheet really gets, fixed up by let's say September or something. So if we can increase the date for the revision of return to 180 days, I think it makes more sense because then it becomes more easier for the corporates to comply with the changes which they need to do in the return.
There is one point which I just remember in support of Mr. Goyal's demand for this, extending it to 10th or 15th with respect to service tax payment. Like, sir, Mr. Justice Iswar panel on this, the income tax cleaning up process, where he talked about a lot of tedious provisions. Again, sir, the service tax, the service providers, in any case, they are collecting it on behalf of the government. They are facilitating the tax collection, and government is collecting huge amount of service tax without incurring any cost. So maybe this leeway could be provided in terms of giving time for reconciliation, etc. Because in any case, service providers are incurring costs.
Shailendra, on the 7.5%, let me register
Yeah.
our view.
Right,
Although it's a painful.
right,
But if we see what was there before the 7.5% came, we know practically for government it is next to impossible to recruit more judges or members in the tribunals, and 80 to 90%, as per my personal experience, the tribunals or courts time goes in listening to stay petitions.
absolutely.
So this by a painful solution, but the government has got an excellent solution, an excellent practical solution. So now all bench members, all courts are free to decide the cases on merit. So by this way, if today your 10% of the appeals was getting heard, it get 10 times more.
Right.
So 7.5% is definitely better than those discretionary stay matters.
Okay.
Only two suggestions to make it more this one. One is rate of interest, like Iswar panel saying,
Right.
if they 6 months, okay, whatever you're paying.
Right.
But if appeal decision take more time, the government should pay back.
In fact, this another interesting point that reminds me, sir. This now the tribunal has gone for 2 more benches, Allahabad and the Chandigarh.
Anyway, this is not the part
No,
of
but this
today's
is
discussion.
very relevant for him. I mean, little thought could have been spared before notifying this. I believe now the Gurgaon units will have to go to Chandigarh, whereas the NCR should have been exempted, or maybe NCR should have gone to Delhi. Similarly, Noida is going to Allahabad. It doesn't make sense.
Mr. Shailendra, we have made a formal request to the government.
Okay.
And see, the same Ministry of Finance, if you see ITAT, I have given even the copy of that ITAT jurisdiction. Delhi ITAT has a jurisdiction on complete NCR.
NCR, right. They should have done. So on this note, let me first thank my guests for making it a very, very interesting and input-rich feedback for Mr. Jaitley, who can certainly take, to begin with, Mr. Goyal suggested that if invoice matching is going to be the key mantra to curb misuse of Senvet credit, then certainly a pilot project will perhaps help here, because if it is made optional, good number of suppliers can upload their invoices, and before releasing payment to the suppliers, the manufacturers perhaps can match it, and this can work well, for the revenue as well as for the trade industry. Secondly, there are several procedures which they talked about which could be simplified, and not necessarily in the budget. It can be done post-budget also. However, the duty structure side, the kitty should be reduced in size. There should be 4 or 5 tax rates in central excise, and even in customs side. In fact, we have a large kitty where huge number of tax rates are there. Perhaps that could be also aligned, keeping in mind the WTO commitment. Looking at service tax part particularly, the threshold and the tax rates. These two, if the threshold is being hiked and should be hiked, because if the GST is the commitment for the government, then naturally the duty service tax rate will go up to 16%, and accordingly for the goods, the exemption threshold should come down. And I think this year is going to be the right year. It has to be a reform-packed budget in terms of taking all these steps which are going to assist and enable him to roll out the GST in, if not this year, maybe April 1st, 2017. That should be the deadline, because after that, most of the experts believe that it will not be politically wise to implement GST. Looking at all these aspects and different suggestions, non-GST related reform should be the priority in central excise. In exemption, of course, number of exemptions has to be reduced. If that is going to be the case, then the tax base is going to grow. Perhaps this will enable Mr. Jaitley to cut the tax rate a couple of places, but as Mr. Majumder suggested, that Mr. Jaitley will have to bank totally on indirect tax for the revenue mop-up, because direct tax side, in any case, Mr. Jaitley has committed himself for a corporate tax, the reduction plan over a period of 4 years. Looking at all these aspects, let's look forward to a reform-packed budget. Thank you for watching.